So let me go with me back over 40 years ago, and I was on a youth group trip with a small group of teenage boys, and we had been in the hill country for the weekend. And we had been dam sliding at Ingram Dam, and we'd been camping at Kerrville State Park for the weekend. And it was a trip that we made pretty frequently back then. And what we liked to do when we left is we would go to a place, I think it was called the Kerrville Inn. We would break camp on Sunday morning. We'd go to the Kerrville Inn for a late morning, big, huge brunch breakfast. And so we had been there on a Sunday morning, and we were driving back home to the Woodlands, or to Conroe at that time. And there was a truck full of all the equipment, and there was a van following us with the sponsors and some of the other group in the van behind us. And I was in the truck, and the driver of the truck, a lifelong friend of mine, still a friend to this day, we had agreed that we would take turns driving. So at this particular point, we'd been on the road for a couple of hours, and we were on Highway 21 between San Marcos and Highway 290 on our way home, and it was my time to be sleeping, until I realized that it was also his time to be sleeping. And as we ran off the road and I woke up, I went as hard as I could and I slapped him in the chest, and the first thing that he did was grabbed the steering wheel and yanked the tires as hard as he could to the left, which caused us to flip over 2 times over the road in front of the counselors that had taken us on the trip, as the camping gear flew out of the back of the truck and we rolled 2 rolls over into the ditch on the other side of the road. We both walked away from that. Life lesson, life is fragile. And it probably didn't sink into me that particular day. This is a little funny picture here I'll share, and then I'll hand around here. This accident happened about 3 hours after this picture was taken. And it was something that impacted me, but probably not as much as it should have at that age. So Elizabeth mentioned that she likes to have speakers tell challenging stories about life lessons and overcoming things and successes. I'm not big on speaking. I don't like to talk about myself. Don't get me wrong, I love public speaking. I've done a lot of public speaking. I like to talk about things that I'm passionate about, and I like to talk about leadership, and I like to talk about causes. I don't necessarily care about talking about myself. But I am going to share with you some of my own life lessons today and see if we can't talk about how they got me where I am, how your life lessons get you where you are, and what you can do with those as we lead in this time of crisis. So, and if you know me well, even those of you who know me well, you may learn something a little different about me today, because even that story, I'm not sure how many people knew. So I'll tell you another story. Around the same time frame, and I was we'll talk about this a few times, but I was a cocky teenager, and I happened to be the leader of my Boy Scout group, and I was headed to a Boy Scout meeting at the church one night, and I was running late, and I come flying into the parking lot, and there are no parking spaces to be found. And so I'm a big, important guy, got to go to church, to the scout meeting. I pull in the driveway of the rectory, and I block the priest's garage door with my car. And I go on into my meeting because I've got Boy Scout stuff to take care of, right? So I come out of the meeting and he's waiting for me. And he lit into me for blocking his driveway, as he well should have. But worse than that, he called my father. And my father went to his grave never being as mad at me again, I don't think, as he was that one night. Life lesson, respect authority. So the next thing in my life, which was the same time period, again, I'm pretty independent at this point. I was the leader of a scout troop. I was the president of the student body of the high school, and I had finished my summer job, and it was time to move to college. And a couple of my friends were already up there, and they're calling me on the phone. Man, you got to get up here, man. We're just sitting around drinking beer. It's great. You got to be here. Yes, when I went to college, the drinking age was only 18, so it was a little while ago. But my parents both worked near our home and would come home for lunch. And one day they came home for lunch, and we were chatting, and I said, I may just go on to college this afternoon. And they're like, wait a minute, what do you mean? And I said, I think, I don't know. Everybody's calling me. I think I may just go. And so they went back to work, and when they came home at 5 o'clock that afternoon, I had packed my shit and I was gone. And that's how I left for college. There was no ceremony. There was no driving me up there. There was no decorating my room. I was gone. I think I probably left a nice, very short note for my parents. That's not a life lesson, but it gives you a little bit of idea of who I was at that point in my life. A few years later, I was adorned a nickname, and that nickname was Clipboard. And that's because I'm a little bit organized, still tend to be. I'm not quite as anal as I used to be, but I was the organized one in our group, and I was the organized one on our annual spring ski trips to New Mexico and to Steamboat Springs, Colorado. And so I was called a Clipboard, and here is an actual clipboard with a picture of me holding a clipboard. And to give you an idea, that is a paper map with a highlighted route on it. We don't have to do those kinds of things anymore. That's a paper map with a highlighted route on it from Austin to Steamboat Springs, Colorado. Of course, I caught a lot of grief on one of those trips because I also would calculate estimated gas mileage, and I would be the one to decide when we stopped for gas. And when we ran out of gas in North Texas in the middle of the night one night, because I swore we could get to the next city based on my calculations, then I was forever catching grief about inaccurate mileage calculations from my group. So there's a few things about where I was and what I was like when I was in college. Fast forward a few years, and I found myself married and had 2 children, 2 great children, but I ended up going through a divorce, and that wasn't part of my plan. And my life lesson from that was that life doesn't go according to your plan. And we'll hear that one again a few times. But, and then the good thing about that is that that led me to being able to reconnect with a high school girlfriend who I have now been happily married to for over 20 years. So we've had a blended family for 20 years after both of us had been previously divorced. So early on in my marriage, this second marriage, I was diagnosed with cancer in 2003. And I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and it was a huge faith opportunity for me, and that is the life lesson of that. It was a faith opportunity. And it was not life-threatening at the time, and I made it through 6 months of chemo, and I was declared in remission in January of 2004, so that's been a long time now. But that was a very impactful thing for being the way that I've already described to myself, controlling, anal, independent. There was nothing I could do about the fact that I had been diagnosed with cancer in my own power. I had to give it up. It was a huge faith opportunity. I was used to molding my future and trying to control things in my life. And that wasn't something I could do when I faced cancer. So it was a faith opportunity for me. And that was and I also adopted something that's become a little bit of a mantra for me. The abbreviation is GHAP, but what that means is God has a plan. And He does, and it often does not match ours, and we just need to understand that. So that was my life lesson from that. A few years later, I helped actually shut down a business. And the reason that is impacted me is because at various times with this company, we thought we were going to take a subsidiary of the company public, and we were all going to make a ton of money. And then I actually thought, well, after that didn't work, that this might be a lifelong career for me. I might actually end up moving to California into a higher role with the company. And one thing led to the other, and I find myself actually helping them liquidate that company. So again, life doesn't follow the kind of plans that you may have, but we can overcome those kinds of things. In 2007, I lost my father to leukemia. And leukemia is a blood cancer, just like lymphoma that I had, but there is no scientific reason to believe that that's hereditary. They are 2 different types of cancers. But in 2007, I lost my father to leukemia. And my life lesson from that was that if I could gain half the respect in my lifetime that my father had, then I would be successful. I never heard a single person say anything bad about my dad. My dad was the county engineer in Montgomery County for a long time, and when the Woodlands was being developed, as a matter of fact. And I don't know of anybody that was unable to work with him. And people respected him, and if I can be half as respected as my father was, that's my life lesson from that. Unfortunately, exactly a year later, we lost my mother-in-law, Fran's mother, to cancer also. So we each lost a parent within about 13 months, which is a difficult thing to go through. Here's a cool thing about my life lesson from losing Fran's mother. Fran's mom taught us all, learn your waiter and waitress's name, use it frequently, and tip them well. And it's funny, my daughter, who is now in her 20s, grew up sitting around when we would go out to dinner. She learned that from her. We all learned that from her. And she respected people who were wait staff. And she's got a granddaughter that's now that has been in the service industry. So that was one of the things that has stuck with me from my mother-in-law that passed away a year after my dad did. At age 48, not long after that, I started running. And the life lesson of that to me is at that point in my life, and I had never been a runner and had never been much of an athlete at all, but the life lesson in that to me was that with a little bit of discipline, you can do anything. And I still run. I don't run as much as I used to, but I've run a couple of marathons and I've run over 30 half marathons. And so it's a personal accomplishment thing that I think that the lesson is that you can, if you put your mind to it, you can accomplish something. 10 years ago next month, literally 10 years ago next month, I started Blanton Advisors. Blanton Advisors is a CFO and business consulting firm here in the Woodlands. And I did that because I referenced the company earlier that we actually shut down. I had been in banking and banks were bought and sold. And so I was tired of ownership changes and industry mergers and acquisitions, and I wanted to control some of my own future. And that's what having my own business enabled me to do. A little over a year ago, we lost an adult son to originally, he had been diabetic for many years, but in addition to his diabetes, he struggled with mental illness and drug dependency and homelessness for over 12 years. And he passed away May a year ago. And the life lesson from that is that it's hard to help people if they don't want to help themselves, even if they are the closest thing to you in the world that you could ever have. If they don't want to be helped, it's hard. It's not possible. And that was a life lesson for my wife and I. And then I guess the other life lesson just from don't ever think that something else can't happen. 2 months after she lost her son, my wife was diagnosed with breast cancer. And she's still going through that. She completed most of her treatment during quarantine of all things, but she's still dealing with some issues with that now, and she's still got at least one more surgery to go this fall. But she's the strongest woman that I know, and I know that she'll get through it. Another faith opportunity for us. So that's a little bit about me and how I got where I am. And let me tell you a little bit about what I've done with those lessons and how I think all of us can take where we come from and the things that happen to us and turn them into something. Number one is my faith, which I have attempted to maintain, and I'm not good at that. I won't tell you that I'm good at that. I run hot and cold with that, but through all these different challenges, that's been something that I've tried to maintain. Starting my own business. You know, we've been in business for 10 years. I didn't start a consulting business in order to find my next job. I started a consulting business to make it a business and to help small businesses. And we've probably helped over 45 small businesses, actually probably 55 small businesses over the course of the last 10 years. Then the thing that I have a lot of passion about, which Elizabeth knows and is part of the purpose of this organization, is leadership. And I think that there's three things that as leaders, and by the way, we're all leaders. If you don't think you are, let's talk after this today. But we're all leaders. Number one, you need to grow yourself. Number two, you need to help grow those around you. And number 3, we need to develop the next generation of leaders. And 2 and 3 are similar, but they're not, because growing those around us are the people that are our peers that we run into every day. Growing the next generation of leaders are the people that are going to take our place doing the things that we are doing right now. So those are the 3 things that I think are important about leadership. And then lastly, the thing that I've done with part of this is adopted different causes. And I've been very community involved for a long time. Initially, when I was in banking, I was real involved with the United Way. And many years ago, I actually was the chairman of the United Way, and I spoke at an event with Mr. George Mitchell, and there's a picture from that event. And it happened when Mitchell Energy and Development became the first company to give $1 million to what was then called the Montgomery County United Way. So I was real involved with that. I was also the chairman of the board of 2 YMCAs in Montgomery County, and I went to the YMCA as a kid, and I worked at the YMCA as a kid, and then I had the honor of being able to chair 2 different YMCA organizations. But the biggest thing, and the thing that I'm the most proud of, is my involvement with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. My dad died of leukemia. I had lymphoma. We've put a lot of effort behind that organization over the last 15 years. And our family has raised over $320,000 in 15 years. And the event that we helped start in the Woodlands called Light the Night has raised $8.3 million in 15 years. So that's just something that I probably wouldn't have done. And I probably wouldn't. I got involved. My dad was still alive for the first 2 walks. I got involved because of my own cancer, but I probably wouldn't have stayed involved or worked as hard if it wasn't for what happened to my dad. So that's a little bit about me, which is enough of that. Let's talk about where we are right now. How do you feel right now? Elizabeth and I had a conversation, might have been via text the other day, but I write a blog called the Monday Morning Minute, and one of them recently was entitled Wet Blanket, because I feel like there is a wet blanket over us right now with COVID. I feel like it's hard to breathe. It's hard to see where the end is. You can't make decisions. You don't know when it's going to be over. It's just like, what are we supposed to do? It's kind of sluggish feeling. And unfortunately, it's not going to be over like a light switch over, off and on. It's just not going to be. And that's not the only thing facing our country. I mean, we have racial tension, we have political tension, but I'm speaking mostly as leaders of organizations, companies, and businesses. What do we need to do during COVID? I don't know about you, but I miss things when this room would be full. I miss hugs and smiles. This is probably the most dressed up I've been since March 15th. I mean, that's not right. So, but it is, I don't like the word new reality or the new normal, but maybe that is what it is. But here I want to talk about a few things about how to lead through this crisis specifically. The interesting thing is that there are no guidebooks on this. When I went through a divorce, you could read books on going through a divorce. I met a best friend of mine, still a great friend of mine to this day. He was going through a divorce at the same time. We had kids the same age. So we went through that together. When you start a business, you can read a book about how to start a business. You can hire counselors about how to start a business. When the economy goes through a downturn, you can research past downturns. You can understand what's going to happen in a downturn. When there's a hurricane, you know what's going to happen, unless it's Harvey and hangs around a little too long. But most of them come and go, and you know that the power is going to come back on in 3 days or 7 days. If you're laid off from a job, you know what your next steps are to look for a job. There's people that can help you look for a job. You go to the internet now and look for a job. When there's a death in the family, as hard as it is, there are other people who have lost family members. There are books about grief. There are support systems for that loss. There's no guidebook for COVID-19. Yes, there was a pandemic in 1918. If any of you were there, you're way older than I am, and I feel like I'm the oldest person in the room. So there's not a guidebook out there for how to deal with this. Nothing will be the same after this. If you recall, the world was forever changed with 9/11. And to some degree, I think this is similar. I think that, and we're going to talk about a few specific things, but people's habits aren't going to be the same ever again. Their travel habits are going to change. Their buying habits have changed. Their personal preferences have changed. Their eating habits have changed. And those things aren't going to automatically go back to the way they were before. So how do we lead through this? I think I've got 6 basic premises that I want you to think of. The first one is hope. Leaders are purveyors of hope. And the number one thing that we need to do for the people that follow us, work with us, work for us, that we can encourage or influence, is to provide hope. People want hope. They want hope in their future. They want hope in stability. They want hope that there will be an end to this, even though it may look different. So we need to help provide hope. Secondly, we need to be realistic. And that may sound a little counter to hope. But I think it's critical that we be realistic, especially now. If you think about it, when this first happened, a lot of people's first reaction was, okay, we're going to get through this. And by August 1st, it's going to be over and it's going to be better. Or by next fall, it's going to be over and everything's going to be back to normal. Well, we now know that that's not true. So we need to be realistic with our teams. We need to be realistic with people about what is going on and what the reality is. Thirdly, action-oriented. Be action-oriented. This is not the time. Initially, if your response was, I'm going to hunker down and wait till this gets over, maybe that was okay. It's not like that anymore. If you're not making decisions to change the way your business is working in this world, then you're behind already. Businesses and organizations need to take action now. We may not know all the answers. We certainly don't know when things are going to be largely over, but we can't not make decisions. We need to take action now. Fourthly, I think we need to be acknowledging. We need to acknowledge what our followers and our teams are going through. They're nervous, frustrated, maybe depressed. They're spousal, they're spending a lot of time at home. They're more confined than they used to be. Their employment situation, one or the other, or could be up in the air. And they're certainly dealing with homeschooling issues. We need to acknowledge those things. And as leaders, when I say acknowledge, we need to say, I know you have kids at home. How can we make that work? How can we help you get through that? And that's what I mean by acknowledging things that people are going through. And then the last thing, and it may be similar to hope, but be encouraging. And it's really not similar to hope. I think hope is a bigger picture thing. Encouraging is specifically encouraging somebody to improve themselves, to do something new, to do something different, to take a step in a direction that they may not have been headed or that's outside of their comfort zone. And largely, a lot of what we're experiencing is outside of our comfort zone. So be encouraging to your teams. You know, we don't have a pandemic leaders manual, but we do know how to do these things. So we may not have led through a pandemic, but we know what it means to provide hope. We know what it means to be realistic. We know what it means to be action-oriented. We know what it means to be acknowledging, and we know what it means to be encouraging. Those are things that we can do as leaders, whether we've led through a pandemic or not. I've not led through a pandemic. None of our lives have had that life lesson. Your life lessons are yours. My life lessons are mine. We happen to share the COVID life lesson, but we all come from different backgrounds, and how we put those backgrounds to positive use in our daily life as leaders is up to each and every one of us. But the one thing that we cannot do is not use those experiences to improve ourselves and to improve others. That's what we're beholden to as leaders. So, in the spirit of grow yourself, which if you go back to leadership, the first thing that I listened was to grow yourself. I'm going to leave you with 3 things. In the vein of what are you reading? I just finished reading this book, which is a biography of George P. Mitchell. So hopefully everybody knows that George Mitchell founded the Woodlands. So a couple of things about this. Mr. Mitchell, this is not a leadership book. Mr. Mitchell was not a great leader. It's actually pointed out in this book that Mr. Mitchell was not a great leader nor a great communicator. He was an incredible visionary, beyond what most anybody that even worked with him could understand. He was a great visionary, incredibly passionate, and very much more social cause oriented than I even knew before I read the book. The book is important to me. I met him more than just that one time with the picture. My father helped develop the Woodlands because he was the county engineer at the time. So the history of the Woodlands was interesting to me. Now, it does get a little bit geeky on the fracking and the oil and gas side. If you're in the oil and gas world, you might get more out of that than I did. But this is a great book, and we are living in a community, which Elizabeth described as the greatest community in the country in the opening. We're living in the community that is here solely because of the work of this man. How many of you know what this building used to be?
They had a big map thing.
Only one? Okay, Information Center. It wasn't the first one, the Home Buying and Information Center. The first one sat where Beck's Prime over in the old Grogan's Mill Shopping Center is. That was the original Home Buyers and Information Center, and then this one was built later. That's what this building was originally good. Okay, so that's one thing. That's a piece of reading. So the second thing, how many of you ever heard of the author Patrick Lencioni? Okay, I've gotten a good idea. Then nobody live in the room has heard of Patrick Lencioni. So Patrick Lencioni, you may have heard of the book, The Perfect Team Player. Ideal Team Player, the Ideal Team Player, excuse me. Patrick Lencioni has written several books. The books are great. They're mostly written in fable style, so they're a story that you learn a lesson from, which in my small brain helps me stay engaged in the book. So that's a good author to check out. But more specifically, he's currently doing a podcast called At the Table, and because he owns a company called The Table Group. But if you can look him up by his name or At the Table and look up their podcast. But there's two of them that are specifically interesting that I would encourage you to listen to because they're COVID specific. And they deal with my last topic, one of my topics about being action oriented. One is called Plant Your Frigging Tree. And the whole idea is do something now, even if 6 months from now it seems wrong. And then the second one is called Burn Your Ships. And they're from about 3 weeks ago. They're in the July timeframe if you're looking at a calendar of podcasts from At Your Table. So both of those are really worth listening to. Plant Your Friggin' Tree and Burn Your Ships. And you'll know what I mean if you go listen to them. And they're 20-minute podcasts. They're not hour-long things. So it's consumable. And then the last thing, if you're interested, I mentioned the Monday Morning Minute. I write a weekly blog. It's on Facebook. You can also contact me, and it's sent out by email distribution as well. So those are things that you can do to continue to grow as a leader, because I think that's what we're required to do as leaders. And my encouragement to you today is go be an inspired leader. Take your life lessons and how you got where you are and turn that into something that can help other people, and go be an inspired leader. Thank you.